Hey guys, Frank here with another episode of Modern Church Leader. Excited to have this conversation today with my new friend. We've been chatting for a while. She's in her kid's bedroom. I'm going to tee that up now. But Jess, why don't you say hi to the audience?
Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be here with you in my son's bedroom. We are full sending today during this podcast.
We're full sending. It's going to be the title of this podcast, Full Send.
Full send. Sounds good.
I love that he also has like the mini basketball hoop. Like I was very fond of those as a kid, always playing with one. So much respect.
Well, and there's a Tennessee Vol flag over here. And so he's a big Tennessee Vol fan. So that's over there. And yeah, and I'm sitting in front of a PlayStation 5. That's to my right.
That's like the classic teenager's bedroom right there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you coming on the show. Why don't you tell folks a little bit about yourself? Like you've been in ministry for a long time. You've done some really cool things. It's been in the family, and now you're, you've moved and now you're working at Generis, but I'd love for you to just give folks a little intro into you and kind of your background.
For sure. So this is my 22nd year in ministry, about to be 23rd. I started when I was 19, and my dad was a church planner in rural East Tennessee area, just outside of like the Knoxville area. So East Tennessee Valley area. And my dad came to me and was like, I want you to do children's ministry. I had this idea that I was going to be the reporter that follows the president around. Like, that's what I wanted to be. That would be an awful job now. Like looking back, I'm like, God was really protecting me. I'm so glad what happened.
How did you get, let's pause. How did you get interested in that?
Well, I do love like political science. So I knew I wanted to go into broadcasting. And so when I started college, I went into broadcasting, and I was a reporter at WVLT in Knoxville for a while. But when I was in college, they make you take, different courses. And I took political science and realized that I absolutely loved it. Like I loved learning about the government and regulation. And I know that sounds boring to some people, but like I was just enamored with it. And so I ended up getting a minor in political science because I took so many classes of it. And that's when I decided I wanted to be like in Washington, D.C. And I wanted to either be, like in the press corps or doing something. That didn't work out. But my dad came to me and said, hey, I need you to do children's ministry. And I'm an only child. And I said, I don't like kids and I don't want to be in ministry. And so he was like, okay, I'll just pray about it. And I think it was like 4 months later that he was sending me to North Point to get some training. And so I helped him launch a few of his campuses, and I did fall in love with children's ministry and just the idea that church could be fun. I think I had, I had been raised in a good church. I'm not saying it was a good church, but there was no children's ministry. There was Sunday school where we learned the Bible stories, but there was no actual like empowerment of parents. There was no owning your child's faith development. There was no like church fun. We went to a church camp in the summer. Like I went to GA camp in the summer, Girls in Action. There was no like fun at church. It was just church. And I remember when Dad sent me to the training, me thinking, wow, this is actually fun. Like it's fun for kids. Like they could want to be here every single week, not just like dreading it, And I remember getting up on Sunday mornings and, faking that I had a cough because I just didn't want to go to church that day, and so I just fell in love with this idea of relevant ministry to parents and kids. And so I did it both bivocationally for a few years, and then just said, like it's time for me just to follow the calling, because I knew God was calling me into full-time children's ministry. So I did that for a few years. Transitioned to Charlotte because of some things that happened in the business world with my husband. And we really quickly got connected with Elevation Church, led by Pastor Stephen Furtick. And they were just kind of honestly in a leadership vacuum. I think they would probably affirm that as well. They were growing so fast. They had 1,800 people. They were only a couple of years old and had 1,800 people, and they'd started with 7 families, and And they knew they needed to launch, that God had very clearly told them that they were going to go multi-site, but not very many people had on their, on their staff had any experience in that. And I did. And
Yeah.
so, Frank and I came on staff, and we came on staff as campus pastor and children's campus director at the Rock Hill location in South Carolina, which was the first location that they had that was just over the state line. Charlotte sits on the state line. And but then within a year, we were on the executive team and we were central, and I was overseeing the campuses. So I had the opportunity to launch 16 of their campuses for them. Got to be a part of, like, you hear people say this is a movement. And I'm not saying that things aren't a movement, but I think sometimes we use that phrase just like, oh, it's a movement of God. But like, we watched our church go from 1,800 people to 30,000 people in,
Yeah.
6-8 years. And it genuinely
It's
felt like,
crazy.
right. It felt like that we weren't in control ever. And it was just the most beautiful thing ever. Like, it was such scrappy ministry. Even when we were that big and we had bigger budgets, it still felt like scrappy ministry, because it just felt like we are not in control of this. This is clearly what God is doing. And I learned so much. I mean, just being thrown in
Mhm.
the fire, and I learned so much. And then 6 years ago, my dad, or my husband, not my dad, my dad did eventually move down here to be with us, but my husband had an opportunity to join with Orange and to be the CEO of Faith Family Centers, which is a nonprofit division, or a for-profit division of Orange, which is a nonprofit company, and do some very cool things that would appeal to millennials, and also kind of merge the business world and the church world. And he's doing really good with that. But when I moved here, I got connected through a couple different people with Janaris, who was looking to start a church coaching and consulting team. And I had been doing that when I was at Elevation. Like, I was the person that if you needed
Yeah.
a SKU number from a table, because you wanted to order it in one of our campuses, you called me. Or if you wanted our volunteer coaching documents, like I would share those with you, or whatever it may be. I was the person that you called. So I was still getting calls about that even after I left the church, because other churches were calling, and then they would just call me. And so Janair said, why don't you come on and be a ministry coach for us? And it worked really well, because I already had some people
Yeah.
that I was coaching and they needed coaching. And so now it's been 5.5 years, I think, with Janaris, and every day is an adventure. I mean, new churches, every church is different. But honestly, the ministry problems remain the same. We need more volunteers. We need to engage more. We
Right.
want to impact our community more, so we all have kind of the same issues, the same challenges, but honestly, in the bigger picture, it's just God's kingdom. And so, every church may be a little
Mhm.
unique, but we all kind of have to deal with the same issues. But I love
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
I do. Absolutely love it. So
I mean, that's a pretty amazing ride. I could only imagine what it'd be like to be at, Elevation, or, or another church that went through some kind of growth like that, and just watch it grow and watch God work and just see the whole thing. Like, I mean, Elevation been around for a long time, but definitely, right,
yeah,
this thing exploded and
it did.
is everywhere
Yeah.
now.
Right. I mean, I remember Pastor Stephen saying, in 2010, we wanted to be at 10,000, and we were all like, that's crazy. Like, we were like, that's a crazy, like, why'd you say that out loud? Like, don't say that. Like,
To us, you can think it to yourself, like, keep it
right.
over there.
And then we were, and it was just, and I mean, it was just at every turn, just watching God move, and the incredible things. And we weren't perfect. We made lots of mistakes, and we ended up in the news quite frequently because we made mistakes. 'Cause
Yeah.
we were all in our late 20s and early 30s. Like, we were just like trying to follow the calling of God and do the best we could, but we all made
Yeah.
mistakes. We weren't perfect, and but we learned from them. And yeah, it was such a fun, enjoyable experience to be in, truly, like this movement of God. And just a funny little thing, my very first conference, because I speak at probably, I don't even know, 6 to 12 conferences a year, depending on what year it is. But my very first conference, never spoke at a conference before, but Elevation was up and going, and Pastor Stephen had gotten invited. So they were like, well, just bring your whole team. We'll use them as our breakout speakers. So my very first conference was the Hillsong conference. Like, that was my first conference speaking at. And I was like, wow, this is from 0 to 60 real quick,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Like,
But
that was easy.
yeah, everything from there is
Um,
just like, but yeah, it was, man, it was just such a ride. Like, I mean, watching our albums, you know, like we would be in the room when songs were being written. Like we were in the room when the altar was written, and now the altar is the altar. Like it's
Yeah.
like the song everybody sings,
Yeah.
And so just like have at the time, it wasn't that we took it for granted. It was just we're just people. Like we're just normal, like
Hmm.
people trying to do God's will. And then to see God take control of it and like use it in this magnificent way that could only be
Right.
from him was incredible. So that was a really fun
Yeah.
ride. But honestly, this new season that I'm in right now, or newer season that I'm in right now, is just as fulfilling. It's just in a different way. It's just kind of a
Yeah.
behind the scenes way, but it's so fulfilling to work with churches and help them.
Well, I love you made a comment at the beginning about just making children's ministry fun.
Yeah.
And um like how do you deal? Let's talk about that, because like we were
Yeah.
both like we both have lots of kids. You have more kids than me, but we both have kids. We love being parents. So children's ministry is like close to our hearts just because of that, right? Like whether you work in it or
Absolutely.
you're just somebody going to church, like you want your kids to be taken care of and inspired and enjoy church. Like you really want them to actually enjoy being
Right.
there, so that like they're influenced spiritually. And I think like church isn't the place that they're gonna be converted necessarily. That's going to come from the home, but like church certainly has a lot of, or can have a lot of influence, especially if they like it. So
Absolutely.
like how do
Absolutely.
churches do that? Like you lived in a world where you're like, I didn't necessarily like it, but then I saw it could be fun, and then you went on this journey helping it be fun, and now you help a lot of churches with that kind of stuff and other things. But I don't know, like walk me through like how you would go help a church make children's ministry fun.
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing that we have to look at is what is your mission and what's your vision? Because every church's mission and vision is different, and
Hmm.
we want to make sure though that the children's ministry vision, even though it's gonna be relevant to children's ministry, it also has to be in line with your mission. And a lot of times, it's children's ministry is out of sight, out of mind. So like you
Right.
really kind of have to start from like the very bottom, like foundational infrastructure type stuff. Like, do we have values in our children's ministry and in our student ministry that reflect the same values of the church? Are those woven together? That's really
Yeah.
important. And so from there, you look at that and make sure that like you're foundationally you're good, and then you have to assess. Like that's the thing. Like, and I think people, they'll call me in to assess, and I'll ask, like, when's the last time that you've done assessment, even in either an internal one where you assessed your own ministry, or an external one where you brought someone like me in to assess your ministry. And most of the time, I get like blank, like, I don't know, I don't
Right.
know if we've ever done it, or it's
Never.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, like maybe 10 years ago, I think we brought this person in. I remember that, that kind of thing. But like that would be insane in the like secular world. Like if a business was only looking at their product, like what their deliverables, if they were only looking at them once a decade or once every, 25 years, they're looking at them
Mhm.
and saying, hey, are we relevant? Are we meeting the needs of our customers? Like they would go out of business within a couple years because like our society, our culture moves so fast. So you
Yeah.
constantly have to assess yourself. And there's lots of different ways to assess. I mean, you can do parent surveys, you can do parent focus groups, you can do kid focus groups. You can do a lot of research and try some new things, try some innovative things for a season, and then like, test and see if that works, that kind of stuff.
Right.
But I mean, you do have to put in a system for assessing, like how frequently are we going to assess? And I would say minimally once a year. You need to be looking at all of your ministries, all of your, your calendar, everything that's on there, and saying, is this still working? Is this still relevant? And then, so I mean, like that's minimally. I mean, I would probably do it a couple times a year if I could. And then once you've kind of got, okay, foundationally, we're in alignment. Okay, now we know we're going to assess and we're going to make sure that we are relevant. At that point, then you start looking at your actual programming.
Mhm.
And you look at how you're resourcing parents, because parents can set you up for success. Like if they have done what they're supposed to do at home throughout the week, then church is not going to feel as awkward because kids are going to have the answers to the questions that people are talking to. It's
Yeah.
why it's why the kids who are the most vocal in church enjoy their experience more. And that's typically the more vocal ones are the ones that the parents have, like empowered them throughout the week to grow their
Mhm.
faith. So, but you do have to look at your programming, and you have to, and your parent engagement, and you have to say, okay, what is relevant, what is not. And I'll tell you, there's not like, when it comes to programming, there's not just like one true formula for it.
Right.
Um, I went to a church, and this is one of my first engagements. I went to a very large church, Timberlake Church in Redmond, Washington, just outside of Seattle. And I was with them for a year and a half, and I would go down for at least 4 to 8 days a month. I mean, it was a really intensive, or go up to Seattle, and it was a really intensive engagement. And I remember one of my first things that I shared, because they had these big church and they had all like filled this room with kids, but I remember watching like their programming as a whole. And then one of my recommendations was, I really feel like that we should probably take the motions out of the songs. And I don't recommend that to everyone now, but at the time I did. And it honestly, it's just growing as a coach and consultant and figuring out that every church is unique and their
Yeah.
demographic. And I said, the reason why, and it's there's information or there's studies that have been done on this. The reason why is that the most influential person in the room is the fifth grade boy. So if you have K through fifth grade in a room, even if you break it into small groups, when they're in large group, the most influential person is the oldest boy in that room. If the oldest boy in the room is having a great time, then the youngest boy and girl in the room is going to have a great time, and it's going to trickle all the way
Interesting.
down. Yeah. So like the girls
Yeah.
are going to be interested. Does the guy think it's cool? Because if the guy thinks it's cool, then I think it's cool, you know? And then the fourth grade boys are looking at the fifth grade boy. Everybody's looking at the fifth grade boy, and fifth grade boys don't typically do motions when they, Jesus, they don't
Right.
do that. They just kind of
Totally.
stand there and
Like
right.
my kids just
And so,
graduated fifth grade. I have 3 fifth grade boys. So
so
they're not the motion kids. Like they're not
right,
about it. So
right. And so like my recommendation made sense, but then, so they did, the church did exactly what I said. And they took all the motions out, and then they started forwarding me, the ministry leader started forwarding me all of these emails that they were getting from parents, and they weren't mad. It was more just like, my kids loved, like they loved the motions to the songs. Like they would come home and share them, and we would all learn them as a family, blah, 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 whatever. Anyways. So then I had to
yeah.
take a step back and be like, okay, maybe I made a wrong recommendation. And so we went in, and what we actually decided to do was, let's just separate the fourth and fifth graders. But because it was working for the K through third, so let's just give the fourth and fifth graders their own space. And so we changed the model. But so there's not like one set of recommendations fits everybody, because that church sits in a super diverse area. Like, I mean, it is right next to the Amazon headquarters. It's right next to Microsoft. I mean, like and they bring people in from all over the world. So it's super diverse. A lot of these people are just being exposed to the gospel for the first time. And so to me, who lives in the Bible Belt and who always has, motions to song seems a little like 2 decades ago, but to them
Right.
it's fresh and new. And so it really is different, and you have to assess yourself, and you have to say, who's our demographic and what is it that they are looking for. Now, I will tell you,
Yeah.
even though maybe programming wise, they were a little bit behind what the rest of the country was, technology wise, it was insane. Like what they
Yeah.
actually had, what they were able to do with their technology was crazy. And so it comes down to, how do you make it fun? You have to make sure that you're in alignment. You have to, with the rest of the church, you have to make sure that you're constantly assessing, and you're, asking yourself, are we the best version of us? Are we connecting
Right.
with kids and with families? And then you have to make your programming fun, and you have to also then, from that point, once your programming is fun, it's a little easier to then make the connection with parents throughout the week, because they want to interact with you, because they're very appreciative of your ministry and of what you're doing and that kind of thing.
Right.
One little thing that's just very interesting, and I think this is good if you're a ministry leader and you're paying attention, is that the needs of parents change through every different season and different, like the stage of development of their child. So when you first, like I have a 1-year-old, and so I'm not taking my 1-year-old to church hoping that they're going to develop his faith at this point.
Right.
I'm just hoping that they are giving him a loving environment, so he sees church as a safe place. Like that's what I'm hoping for him, and that his
Yeah.
physical needs are met, so that then I can then go and worship. Like that's what I need at this stage of development. That's how most parents are. When they move into preschool, it's really like developmentally. They need you to partner with them to development. And it's not just about faith development. There's the beginnings of that, but it's also just about socialization and structure and like, I mean, everything from like dexterity on your hands, like the things that kids are learning in preschool and at that preschool
Right.
age. So you have to make sure that your programming is reflective of what parents' needs are. And at that stage of development, it should be very much about their actual like physical, mental, spiritual, like growth, development, that type of thing. And then when you move into elementary, they already have structure, they have school. whether it be homeschool or private school or public school or whatever they have, or online school, they still have some structure in their lives. And so parents are a little less concerned about their development at this point because they have school now. But what they really want at that stage of development is for their kids to have fun. And they
Right.
want them to build the healthy habit of coming to church. And that's why fun is so crucial at that K through like 5th grade level, is we want them to develop healthy habits. We want them to ask to come to church. Like the music to my ears is when a parent comes to pick up a child and the child's like, can I just stay 5 more minutes? Like, that's like
Right.
the best. And that's always my goal. When we're talking about programming, I'm like, I want kids to beg to stay for 5 more minutes at the end.
Right.
So how do we get to that point?
How do
And
you
if you
help?
think,
Sorry, no,
if you,
go ahead, and then I'll ask a question.
last thing, and then I want to move on. But if you think about you have 3 11-year-olds. So what do you ask your kid when you're picking them up from the preschool class? Like, everybody asks them one thing. It's like,
It's like, what'd you learn today? It's the
what'd you learn
same.
today? Right. What'd you learn today? But when they get into elementary school, so that K through 5th grade, the question changes. You don't ask them what they learned today. You ask them, did you have fun today?
Right.
And it's because the needs of parents and the
Yeah.
needs of the kids are changing as they get older. So got to make it fun. It's
Yeah.
got to be so engaging.
How do you, like, I'm thinking kind of your normal, like just your normal church, right? Your local church, they're a few hundred members, right? They've got like Sunday school type of thing happening, right? Like, they kind of have the pieces, right? They have a small staff and whatnot. How do you, like, what do you see with like those types of churches as it relates to like making children's ministry fun? And then
Yes.
in my experiences, most of them, it is kind of Sunday school-esque and they're doing their best, but like the focus is usually some other place in the church, like some other ministry, whether it's young adults or just maybe young families, but kind of more around the parents or whatever. But like actual kids ministry, it's hard to make it really fun and awesome.
Yeah.
And to infuse it into a church where, like, how do you get them to focus on that and really pay attention?
Yeah. So here's the thing that I would say is that you do not have to be flashy. You do not have to have a big budget to be relevant and to form the connections. Like, parents bring their kids to church for a plethora of different reasons. We talked about a few of them just a couple minutes ago: growth and development, healthy habits. But mostly parents bring them to church because they know they're not enough. Like, I am not enough. If I am their full, like, mental, emotional, like, spiritual development guide, like, I'm not enough. I need people to
Right.
partner with me. And so that's why most of the time parents bring them. But kids are pretty simple, and students, honestly, they're pretty simple. They come to church for 2 reasons, and that's it: fun and friends. That's why they come. Now, we may say, like, oh, they come to memorize scripture. Well, maybe there's one out there that says that. They're coming because they want to have fun and they want to hang out with their friends.
Yep.
The great thing is, you don't have to have a big, huge budget or have any kind of flashiness to create both of those things. You just have to have intentionality on, okay, we definitely have to get through our discipleship, right? Like, that's why they come to church, is because we want them to learn about the principles in the Bible. We want them to learn about God's, story. So of course we have to do that. We can do that in a fun way. We can do activities or crafts or whatever fits your demographic. But you have to make sure that you've sprinkled fun in along the whole way. There should not be, and this is where my church kind of missed the mark with the church that I grew up in. My Sunday school class was actually like decent. It was like my mom was my teacher and she was a fun person. And so, like, it was pretty good. Like, I remember thinking it was fun, but then I had to sit through the service.
Right.
I had to learn how to sit in the pew. And so that overshadowed all the stuff that came before it. And so when I thought of church as just a kid, I just thought of the boring part.
Right.
We need to sprinkle fun through everything. Like, God's word should be fun. If you're telling a story about the Bible, make the story fun. And if your leaders aren't, if they're just like dry, then you need to do training with them. And training doesn't cost any money.
Right.
And so, like, there's lots of things that you can do. You do have to sprinkle fun in. And this is the key: you have to facilitate Christ-centered relationships. Both, yes, mentor, but even more important than just like the mentor aspect is the actual friendship.
Right.
Because the entire time that we are, even now, like my daughter still rides with me to church, but the entire time that we're going, she's talking about Peyton and Megan and all of her friends that she goes to school with that also go to church with her. And she's talking
Right.
about seeing them and what she's going to say to them. And oh my gosh, I've got something I got to tell Megan about, and blah, 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 blah. It's all about the friendships. So, what can you do both on Sunday morning, but also throughout the week to facilitate those friendships? If they
Hmm.
have friends that come to church, then friends will also make it fun. So,
Yeah.
friendship. Last thing I'll say is that one of the great things that COVID did is that it made all of us realize the absolute necessity of personal relationships
Yeah.
because we all got super lonely, right? Like, I mean, even me, who was totally outgoing and could chat with anybody, I mean, I was lonely stuck in my house, like, I mean, it was awful. And that's where society was for 3 years, really.
Hmm.
And we're just now coming out of it. And people need relationships more than anything else. So the more personal that you can make your ministry, the better. And when I say personal, I'm not talking about, I mean, I'm talking about really personal. Like, if you're a small church, take all of the kids and assign them to a leader and have that leader follow up with those families throughout the week. Hey, checking in. When's your baseball game? Can I show up to your baseball game? Or, hey, you're at a swim meet, or you have a choir, or like you have an art, your piece of art is being posted. Where can I go see it at? I want to go check it out.
Yeah.
If the more personal that you can make your ministry, the better you will meet the needs of families. So fun and friendship for kids, make it super personal for parents, and they'll stick around and they'll engage with you.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you see churches doing well as they move into, like, you've kind of gone through fifth grade, then you hit like middle school years. Like,
Yeah.
how do churches create great middle school year programs? Seems like I feel like everything leading up is actually maybe the most important because they're developing a ton and their hearts are very soft and all the things. And you hit middle school, and I'm just about to have middle schoolers. I haven't seen it yet, but I hear
Yeah,
things just kind of explode in middle school. And
they do.
so, like, how do churches create great middle school programs? Like, what goes on there that you think might be a little unique?
So I will tell you that it all starts with the transition. Like, you can't just be like, bye, see ya, now you're a student.
Yeah.
The transition is so crucial. And the transition is probably going to look different for every single church. There should be some like best practices or some elements of it. But just because programming is different, timing is different, when they
Yeah.
have students is different, all that kind of stuff. But the transition has to be so intentional. So your student ministry should be showing up into your children's ministry for about 6 to 9 months before they leave. And it should be more consistency towards the time of of their departure out of children's ministry.
Yeah.
So maybe it's just the children's pastor showing up and he's doing the devotional for that day. 9 months out, and then maybe it's a month later he shows up just for the game and he's just participating in the game. But the closer that you get to that transition, the more with more frequency should your children or your student leaders and your student pastor, any of those kind of like leadership positions should be showing up in your children's ministry. And then when you're right up on it, it's really important that you over communicate all the details with the parents. Like, you
Yeah.
absolutely have to make sure that they know what all of the expectations are, how their child can make it. Maybe you have a class about how to make the transition really well. We lose people as a church. This is across the board. Like, just having launched campuses, I'll tell you that we lose people the most during transition times. Like, that's when we lose them the most.
Hmm.
And I mean, I want you to think about it. One of the hardest things on a church is when you're transitioning a senior pastor, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's because there's a transition and it's the unknown. Well, what comes next? I don't know. So I'm just, going to start to disengage until I check it out, but then you're already disengaged. And so you have to make sure that parents are fully informed. You have to let them get a little taste of student ministry when they're still in children's ministry. So it makes them desire that more.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, you also have to make sure that you are running your report. This is this is really transparent behind the scenes. We were messing up. When Frank and I took over all of Next Gen Ministries for Elevation, we ran a report looking at all of our fifth graders. We ran a report of all our fifth graders and then all of the incoming sixth graders. And we were losing 60% of them. Like, we
Wow.
had a 60% attrition rate. Like, we were only transitioning 40% to
Yeah.
student ministry. We weren't connecting. We were like, what is happening? And it was because
Yeah.
it wasn't.
That's weird, right? Like, for
It
it to
is.
be that. Yeah.
and our student ministry was amazing. Like it was incredible. So we were like, how? But they had gone from small group, like 12 people in a group max, to now we were expecting them to, just because our student programming at the time, it looks different now, but at the time it was just all large group experiences.
Got it.
So
Yeah.
they got, they would disappear in it. And so we kind of just had to realize that, like, okay, we're going to have to walk them through the whole process. So I would tell you to also, you have to run the report and make sure, and then you need to follow up with each one of those people who haven't made the transition well, they haven't connected.
Yeah.
You need to follow up with them one-on-one. So that's the start of it, is making sure they transition well. And then beyond that, student ministry, middle school ministry, high school ministry, it is all about having incredible small group leaders or Sunday school leaders in a small church. And they don't even have to be the best teachers. I mean, we'd love for them to be the best teachers, but even more important than that is just an approachable personality. And someone who has really good character.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you need people of character in your student ministry who have a really approachable person. That's your qualifications. That's what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Right.
I love that. Yeah.
Of faith with character, and they need to be really approachable, because, and also just willing to invest in students.
Yeah.
Students,
like you gotta have people that actually kind of want to do that, or see the value in it.
Yeah. Because I have been to really boring student ministry programming that was blowing up, and I'm sitting there thinking, why is this blowing up? And then I sat through their small group times with a couple different small groups, and I'm like, oh, it's because this is their tribe.
Right.
Like, these are their people. And so and then I've sat through really, really exciting, flashy, hip, super cool programming for students, and they can't figure out why they're not growing. And it's because in their small groups, they're just reading questions on a piece of paper.
Right.
And that's not going to work.
Yeah.
And so it really is, it all boils down to the actual lay leadership that you have. How invested are they? How approachable are they? And the litmus test for even, they have to be a person of faith and character. We've had too many stories, Big C Church, with, mistakes made, and we have to be above reproach. And so, but it has to be so, that's the most important thing, is it's all about relationships. So you have to have somebody, lay leadership in these small groups, that are facilitating those friendships, making it fun, making it funny, and is willing to invest their time and energy into this group of students. And that's
that makes
sweet
it
spot.
That makes it happy. Yeah. How are you weaving in, just maybe as we approach the end, how are you weaving in hybrid church, or what are you seeing churches do in the children's ministry or even student ministry? It's tricky, broadcasting service or doing online church in one way,
it's so hard.
Yeah. It's that part sounds easier, but doing kids ministry online just sounds nearly impossible.
Yeah. Cause if you go back to everything we just talked about, fun and friendship, how can you create friendships online? It's so difficult. You can do it. It can be done. I do have, especially in student ministry, I have a couple people who are doing some Zoom groups at different churches. And so that might be working. But even then, I don't know. I just think it is so very difficult. So I think at that point, if you have people who that are not engaging with your church in a one-on-one personal, I'm here present type way, they're more online, then you have to reach out and empower those parents even more. And they're going to have to own their faith development. And that's the thing. We don't do that. We will broadcast our location. We broadcast our service, and we will take the numbers that we have. Oh, this is how many people tuned in. And we present that at some kind of staff meeting. But then you got to think about, how many kids does those numbers represent? How many kids are in those homes? And you can probably even get a roundabout number. It may not be perfect, but it'll be close, because you can look at your demographic and say how many kids per family that attend here. And so say you have 700 families that are attending and you have 2.1 kids. Well, we're talking about 1,450 or 1,400 or 1,500 kids who aren't coming to church. Well, then what? How do we then empower those parents? And it really comes down to resourcing, and you have to resource them well. And resourcing doesn't necessarily mean that it's a kit or a card. We're not giving them a parent card to put on. They're not going to do that. I'm all for refrigerator door cards. No, nothing wrong with those. Well, that's not going to do anything. Even if you mailed it to their house, it's not going to do anything.
Yeah.
So then what? And I would probably tell you, going back to that, assigning families, even your your families who are tuning in digitally, assigning them to an actual physical leader on your
Mm-hmm.
campus. Say, hey, here are your 4 families that are have a tendency to tune in more like in a digital way. We need you to reach out to them and connect with them,
Right.
because the goal would be to transition them back into
Yeah,
like,
find a way. Like you gave a bunch of examples, like go to the sports game or go to the art,
yeah,
like any of these things, like find a way to go get in person with them,
yes,
with the family,
right,
see them,
yeah.
right, and bring them back.
And if they won't like give you those details, or at minimally, then be really consistent with your connection. So
Mm-hmm.
like send them a card every couple weeks, text them, like a couple times a month. Do a little drop gift at their mailbox or at their front door, like that kind of thing. Like be super intentional. If they won't allow you to kind of break that barrier of engagement, then you've got to, use all the tools in your toolbox to try to create some kind of engagement going on
Right.
with them.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. Are there any, I'm like trying to simplify some stuff down. Are there any things that you're like, oh man, like churches need to do these 3 things like every time, like very practical things, like church that can't do all the big stuff, but really practical. You're like, oh, every time I go in, this 1 or 2 or 3 things, like they got to do this.
Yeah, they got to nail their first time guest experience. They absolutely have to nail it. And I'm not even saying, like, I love a good first time guest gift. I love a second time guest gift. Like, I love that. I love like incentivizing them to come back. I mean, we can get really, I wrote a book about this. Like, we can get really like lots of ideas,
Yeah.
whatever. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you need to have the right person at the first time guest check in area, or at least a person that's assigned to that can create a conversation and get to know them.
Mm-hmm.
That's my volunteer position at my church. And the reason is because when they asked me where I wanted to volunteer, I knew I wanted to volunteer in children's ministry, but I also knew like this is one of the most important things that churches miss. And because they treat it like a system, and yes, we have first time guest systems,
Yeah.
but you can't be like just oh, you fill out this card here and you flip it over here or whatever. Okay, now I'll walk you back to your class.
Right.
Like that is not what it needs to be. It needs to be, how did you hear about us? Oh, you go to that school? I know a kid who goes to that school. Would you play any sports there? And then as you're walking back, you're telling them, hey, listen, when you come to pick up just some insider information, we want you to, pick up your preschooler first because the line's going to be longer with the elementary, and that'll
Right.
save you some time. My name is Jessica, so come and see me at the first time guest. You have any questions, even if it's not related to children's ministry, I'll find an answer for you.
Yeah.
Now they have an advocate. And so like they know somebody at the church.
Yeah.
So it's so very important that you nail that first time guest experience and the first time guest follow-up. You have to follow up. So like that's a crucial point. I would also say like some just other like quick best practices. Environments will set you up for success or failure. If you have a dark room or a stinky hallway or whatever, like you got to change. It doesn't have to, you don't have to remodel everything, but you got to add some lights. You got to get some Febreze, whatever. Like your environments will set you up for success with creating fun experiences.
Yeah.
If people have a negative view when they're just walking in the door because it smells bad or it looks bad or it's not, it's too crowded, you don't have enough space, that's a problem too. But or you don't have enough volunteers, whatever, they're already expecting you not to meet their expectations. Like they're expecting you to fail.
Yeah.
So you're probably not going to overcome them. So I would say you have to focus on your environments. You have to have a great first time guest experience. And I know I mentioned it earlier, so I'm not going to go into it, but those door conversations, they are the last, you are the last like line of defense. You're the last thing that the parent is going to talk about, to see, to have an interaction with before they go get in their car and leave.
Yeah.
If that door interaction is good, you can save an experience. I always say the most powerful people in the entire church are children's ministry door leaders. Like they're the people at the door. And the reason that I say that is because I saw it happen over and over and over again at Elevation. Pastor Stephen, he's incredible. He's one of the best communicators on the planet. He's going to deliver an incredible message. It's Elevation Worship. They're like nominated for Grammys and stuff. It's going to be awesome. The buildings are fantastic. Even whether it be non-permanent or permanent, it's going to be a beautiful building. The volunteer teams are trained to the nth degree. Like it's a great experience.
Yeah.
If they come to pick up their toddler and their toddler is in a dirty diaper and they have a bad interaction at the door with the door leader, they're never going to come back. It doesn't matter how great their experience was. So you have to make sure that those last conversations, that those are important conversations that meet the needs of the parents and also have a great interaction before they go get in their car, because that's what they're going to be talking about when they get in their car.
Yeah.
And they may go on to the sermon later on, but when they're getting in the car, they're going to be talking about the last thing that happened. So
I mean, it's so
great.
true. I mean, I can think of my own experience with that, and whether it's like the door person or even like the teacher might be interacting with you as your kids are like checking out or something like that, and there's just like a good experience, and you feel like, oh man, they love my kids. They really
Yes.
like having. I can just tell. Like there's like you just get this feeling like, oh, they gave to my kids today, and you feel it.
Yeah.
When you feel that from somebody connected to the class, or the teacher or the door person or somebody other volunteer that's in the class, like you walk away feeling like amazing. This only happened one time. We were going to a new location at the church I go to, and the kids ministry teacher called my wife like the next day after our first like time there, and
Yeah.
my wife was like blown away, and I was blown away because I was like, how cool. Like she just was like, loved having your kids. They're awesome. Like they bring so much life to the class, like just that alone. And who knows, they could have been a disaster for all I know, but feeling that love from the teacher
Yes.
was awesome.
So it's just so funny that you said that, because I was about to say, like, the last thing I was going to say is the more personal that you can make it, speaking about the actual child,
Mm-hmm.
the more impactful that it will be to the parent.
Yeah.
Because it affirms that they're doing a good job.
Yeah.
Like, and like every parent wants to be affirmed.
Yeah.
And so doing a good job. So say things like, man, your kid is so inquisitive. She asks the best questions. Or, every time that we're in worship, she worships so big. Like, I just love it. Like, she's a little leader, or something like that. And the parents are like, yes, my kid's great, like that.
Yeah.
But it relates to them. Like when I come to church, they build healthy habits. They become better people.
Mm-hmm.
They become more Christ-like when they're here.
Yeah.
And they'll come more. So
Yeah.
the more personal you can make those conversations, the better.
I love it. I love it. This has been awesome. I could talk kid stuff all day long, as could you, obviously. But thanks for sharing some of your wisdom and experience with us.
For sure. Thanks for having me. This has been so fun.
Yeah. Can I ask you two quick questions to end? First one is, what's a book that you've read that you're just like, everyone's got to read this?
Oh my gosh. People ask me this question all the time. I mean, I know it's probably like an answer, but if I'm picking one book, I just talked about the power of small group. So I think you have to lead small. Like if you're in children's ministry, you have to read the book Lead Small. I think it's just absolutely crucial. And when you read it, you'll understand why. So
love it.
Lead Small.
Okay. Lead Small. And then what's a podcast that you're listening to right now?
I'm listening to Carrie Newhoff because my husband was just on the Carrie Newhoff podcast.
That doesn't count. That doesn't count. Give us another one. Give it like a regular podcast that you like to listen to.
I do listen though. I do. That's the one I go to the most.
Okay.
I listen. But
right.
So Carrie's so long. Like his podcasts are like an hour long that you have to. That's why it's like my primary podcast, because I actually get like 4 days out of that podcast. Like at least I think my husband Frank, and Carrie's podcast was like 92 minutes, and so I had to break it down.
Yeah, you got to watch it. Yeah, you're like, how many drives or gym, or point, like, where can I get the whole thing in? I love it. Well, he's got a great podcast, so I'm not down on the podcast. I was just digging for something else.
No, I have another one that I listen to, and I don't. It's just funny because I just started listening to it a couple weeks ago because somebody recommended it to me. But it's just, it's like 2 sassy moms. It's not faith at all. It's just 2 sassy moms talking about things that like moms deal with and stuff.
Yes.
I love it. It's just like, it's a little bit of a guilty pleasure for me, but I'm like, every time I listen to it, I'm like, yes, that's yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming on the show today. This has been great.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys, for listening or watching. We'll check you next week on another episode of Modern Church Leader. Bye.